We had a lot of great movies in 2024, but behind all that greatness, we had some trash. And a lot of it too. So I was able to gather the top 10 worst movies of 2024, so let's talk about them. Yes, the majority of the movies I watched this year were bad. Now, I didn't watch everything that was bad this year though, because if something's trash and everyone's saying it's trash, why would I watch it? But I'm sure you guys did, so you can always leave your list down below of your top 10 worst movies of the year. And with that, let's start the top 10. Moana 2 is basically everything you loved about the first Moana, but take it all away. This movie is nothing but a cash grab. It's there just to make money, because they saw the numbers that Moana did on streaming service and they're like, you know what? This movie would make $1 billion, so then they converted the show they were making into a movie last minute, because this sequel was announced in February of last year. Last minute, came out of nowhere. And the movie feels like that. It feels rushed, it feels chopped together, it feels forced into a movie. The songs are nowhere near as good as the songs of the first movie, and they're not that well written. Then we have characters like Maui, who was the key character in the first Moana movie, not showing up until the last 20 or 30 minutes of the movie, missing most of the movie. And the movie's just not the same without him not in there. And the new characters introduced in here, you do not care for them at all. They're just there. And then that makes the character arcs by the end of the movie not meaningful, because it feels like there is no character arcs because we barely got introduced to these new characters. Even for the main characters too, they don't really go through a character arc. They more go through a story, not a character arc. They don't really learn anything. And just the whole movie feels lazy and just put together, because that's exactly what it is. Moana 2 was just nothing but a nameless cash grab. And right now, hope it doesn't make $1 billion, but it's getting close to making $1 billion. Now, a lot of you guys absolutely enjoyed The Beekeeper, saying it's a surprise of the year. I was not one of those groups. Now, normally, these type of movies, I'm not a fan of. Like Hitman movies like this, they're normally not my thing. With the exceptions of John Wick, they're not really my type of movies. When I heard a lot of talk saying this movie was good, the trailers looked interesting, so I decided to watch it. Wasn't my thing. And that's okay, because normally these type of movies aren't my thing, but I was hoping to like this one, but it ended up coming off as not really my thing. And most of the movie wasn't really a Hitman type style movie, it was more of the scammers talking instead of the actual stuff we wanted to see, which also kind of bumps the movie down. Most movies like this, that's usually the case, but this movie, you're just supposed to have fun with it. I didn't really find that fun in here, it just wasn't my thing. What has SpongeBob become? When I remember watching SpongeBob when I was little, it used to be good. Now, what is this? What I remember SpongeBob being, at least funny, and a good project. This is none of that. Now, the funny thing about this is that it was leaked back in January, and it was released in August. So people already knew how bad the movie was before it even actually came out. And then once it did come out, it just proved how bad of a movie it was. They picked the most generic plot, the generic story. Following Sandy Cheeks is not really a main character that you could put in the movie. And following a story with her, a story that we never really needed. And don't forget the useless villain, the forgettable villain, forgettable plot. Everything's generic, forgettable, and not what you want from SpongeBob. They continue to ruin SpongeBob with these newer projects. I heard the Plankton movie is good though, which comes out on Netflix next year, and guess what? It was leaked again. I'm sure most of you guys didn't watch this, but the only reason I really watched this is because it's like Henry Danger. I didn't watch The Thundermans when I grew up, but I watched Henry Danger when I grew up, and we're getting a movie of that in January, which I am looking forward to, but The Thundermans wasn't really my thing, just because I didn't really grow up with it. It has the same humor as Henry Danger did. It has everything that makes Henry Danger a Henry Danger. I just didn't grow up these characters, so just seeing them return didn't really have an impact on me. Because I didn't really know who any of these people were. I didn't really know the connections with anyone. I'm sure my opinion will be different on the Henry Danger movie we're getting in January, so this month. But this one didn't really connect to me as it should have, just because I didn't grow up with the characters. Now, everyone has this on the worst of the year list. And of course, I do too, so I agree with it. But I do not think the movie is bad as people state it to be. In my review, I even said when I walked out of the movie, I was surprised by it a little bit because it wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be. Now, yes, the ADR just throughout this entire movie, especially on the villain, is awful. You can tell this movie was chopped together last minute and they just threw it out in theaters because the editing is sloppy, the plot is sloppy, writing sloppy, everything is sloppy. It's in competition for the worst comic book movie ever. But I still do think Morbius is worse just because the Madam Web plot alone is a bit more interesting with a person being able to see the future. Because time travel stuff like that is always my thing. And I always loved time travel stories, so anything to do with time travel was always my thing. And I love superhero movies, so time travel and superhero mushed together like that is my thing. So that's why I always enjoyed this movie a lot more than people are stating it to be. But it's still on this list, so obviously I still have all the problems a lot higher than the pro I had. Everything was sloppy, last minute, put together. And this just shows that Sony needs to stop with this universe. And they put a pause on it, which is a sign, but they're looking to reboot it, which is not a good sign. So let's hope they don't really reboot it. Let's just leave DSSU behind and let's look at Madam Web as a treasure of one of the worst movies of 2024. Just in a point of time in January of last year where I was just watching Netflix one day, came across two bad movies, so I just watched them, and they continued to say bad movies until the end of the year. Yeah, this is when I learned not to trust really Netflix movies because Netflix originals are normally bad just because they want something on their streaming service. They need to put something on their streaming service, so they just make a crappy movie. And this is an example of a Netflix movie where they have good actors in it. They have names in it. But that's just what Netflix movies do. They have big names in them, and they just throw them in a movie. They make a movie, just cram it together, and put it on Netflix. Plot is always dull. The movie is always forgettable. There's nothing really interesting in the movie. They just needed something on the streaming service, so they throw something on the streaming service. That's exactly what Lyft does. A movie that was just made to fill up a streaming service and get watches, and to have people watch it. But a big actor's name in it, so people watch it, but that's it. That's their only way of making a person watch their movie, and they just leave the rest up to basically terrible writing. Now, the plot of this movie seemed interesting, of kind of like a zombie-esque kind of movie, but the movie's not good. It kind of seems like an infection movie, it seems like a zombie movie, but it's not really that. We barely get the infection, we barely get the zombies in here, and let's get a boring movie out of it. Now this was not like Lyft just to fill up a streaming service on Netflix, but this one is just kind of there just to be on Netflix. I like apocalyptic stories like this, but this one just didn't do it because the plot is forgettable. Just like every Netflix movie. There's not really a plot in here that's satisfying, interesting. Premise is interesting, but they didn't do it right due to the dull story they had, and throughout the entire movie was just boring and almost unwatchable. Can forgive it for the action here and there, but everything is just extremely forgettable, and throughout the entire movie, after the first 30 minutes, you just want it to end. You're suffering through the rest of the movie. You want to turn it off, but I just decided just to watch it through because I started it. Another example of why not to watch Netflix originals, especially in January. Everyone knows this movie's bad. Everyone knew that going into this movie, but everyone was also watching it out of curiosity. Now, this is basically Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2.0, with Steamboat Willie this time. He's public domain, so we're gonna squeeze a movie together about a guy in a mouse costume going after these workers who are having a party. There's nothing in here that screams Steamboat Willie. You can tell me this wasn't a Steamboat Willie public domain, and I would believe you, because there's nothing in here that stings that public domain. Terrible acting. The acting in here is laughably bad. And they give you who the killer is right off the bat. And they don't try to hide it, which is also a frustrating part, because you can't really piece together who the villain is. And then you have lazy writing throughout it, which just makes for just a almost unwatchable movie with the lazy writing and the terrible acting. That's laughably bad. Now, you can enjoy this movie. You can absolutely make fun of it the entire time. That's how you enjoy it, because the acting is just so bad, the writing is so bad that you can just laugh at it the entire time. And Mickey Mouse as the slasher villain who can teleport, I never really understood the teleporting part of his villain. But we all knew this movie was going to be bad, and it delivered on that exactly. It met my expectations, bravo. Now, I grew up on The Loud House, so this has more meaning to me than it does for probably most people watching. This is basically a spin-off show to The Loud House, and then they made a movie based on that spin-off show. And I basically have all the same problems that I had with the Loud House movie that was released on Netflix as I do for this movie. The plot for the movie makes absolutely no sense for what the show is. Based on what the show is and based on what the movie's plot is, they don't really fit together. The movie's almost utterly unwatchable. Things are so over the top, so berserk, that you just question, what is this movie? By the time you get to the 30-minute mark, you want to turn it off, but I figured I was just this far into the movie, let me just finish it. I was shocked for how bad this movie was. I'm gonna find some enjoyment out of it, but no, it's like straight off bad. It's a terrible movie. And if it wasn't for the #1 movie on this list, this would be the absolute worst movie I've seen this year, and maybe even beyond that. Worst movie of the decade, worst movie of the last 20 years, but because it's a movie in first place, all of that doesn't matter, because movie in first place is by far the worst thing. Do I need to explain myself here? We all love that first Megamind movie. Such unique premise. And we all wanted a sequel to that movie. But then, we got a sequel. Low budget, terrible story, terrible jokes, terrible acting. Everything in this movie is terrible. There's almost nothing good about this movie. This movie was only made to promote a show that was even worse than the movie. There's nothing unique in the movie. There's nothing unique that takes a new step for, that's a worthy sequel. There's nothing in there. They just decided to mush something together. They needed something to put on Peacock because there's not much original shows on Peacock, so they needed something on there. So they decided to take an IP that everyone loved and just make a crappy sequel out of it. And the movie's nothing but sufferable throughout the entire thing. Sit through it, and you want it to end in the first 2 minutes of the movie, because you can just tell for how bad of a movie the entire ride will be. And with movies like this, it completely downgrades 2024 because we have a bunch of great movies, but then we have a bunch of crappy movies like this, and some of them on this list, which completely takes away 2024 for how great of the movies were. And this movie makes for like the worst movie in a long time. I don't remember the last time that a movie was this bad, which makes Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate the worst movie of 2024 and the decade and probably the last 20 years. With that, that was the top 10 worst movies of 2024. If you want to see the best movies of 2024, you can find that video right up here or find another video right down here. But with that, thanks for watching.